I'm Danny, and I Dan. Nope, that's a bad one. Who can? Dan can, and I'm Dan. Ooh, a Dan in hand is worth two with a band. I'm Danny, and you can't. Hi, I'm Danny. Really? That was so boring. It's like I'm Alpha or something. A Danny in the cap is worth a cat in the lap. Oh, hi. All right, bye. All right. All four crushed up cabins coming from a dermum.
What?
All four crystal gems returned from a mission. Amethyst and Pearl bickering. Am caused a mess, and Steven's paying for it. Usually it's just Pearl giving Amethyst a hard time, but now Garnet has something to say.
Amethyst, you are a crystal gem. You need to act like it.
They all forget about Steven.
Guys?
That night, Amethyst sneaks out. Steven decides to break out of his shell and follow her. In a broken down building, a sort of underground wrestling tournament is going on. Is that what it's called? Is underground wrestling? Okay. Amethyst is competing as the Purple Puma. Steven confronts her about this, but in the end agrees. Pearl and Garnet are way up on their backs. He wants to join. Amethyst, seeing the tag team belt on the horizon, agrees. But they have to keep it a secret.
Deal!
Steven puts together a costume using odds and ends from around his bedroom, then comes up with a backstory.
Presenting Tiger Millionaire!
Purple Puma's backstory, you ask? Why?
Pumas are cool.
That night, Amethyst reveals that she's going to be doing all the fighting. Steven just wants to wear the costume.
Okay!
But wait! Her opponent is cheating! Mr. Smiley, a man of a million professions, says that anything goes in wrestling.
It does?
Oh, yes, it does!
Looks like this tiger's gotta turn cheetah.
What follows is a montage of Steven helping Amethyst cheat her way to victory, intermixed with scenes of Steven being terrible at keeping secrets. Steven digs into this persona until one night he's rude to his biggest fan. Apparently neither Lars nor Mr. Smiley have ever seen a heel before.
You are the cruelest creature on the planet!
Steven takes things personally and feels bad. Amethyst says a few semi-healthy things in a really unhealthy tone.
I only feel how I want to feel.
It's time for the championship! They have to fight a pair of handsome, muscular men. The good-looking guys. Before things can get started, Pearl and Garnet show up to interrupt the match. They find it irresponsible that Amethyst would use her gem powers against humans. Amethyst disagrees, and oh my goodness, there's infighting in the gems! Steven breaks it up with a story about Purple Puma finding a place to belong. Garnet and Pearl decide then that they're going to join in on the match as anti-wrestling villains.
You gotta say wrestling!
This is just the weirdest face turn I've ever seen.
Sorry.
Same here.
Pre-analysis vocabulary. Alright, some of us haven't watched wrestling since we outgrew Mucha Lucha. What's going on here? Wrestling is imaginary the same way that DC shows are imaginary. They're filled with plots, villains, heroes, banter, fights for power, disappointments, downfalls, and sweaty, sexy people fighting for domination. The bad guys are called heels, and they and their fans, usually, are in on the script. So when Lars and Mr. Smiley act like Steven's committed some kind of big crime against wrestling, well, they're just showing their ignorance. Lars, ignorant? Nah. The good guys are called faces. They get the cheers and tend not to cheat or use dirty moves. Anyone can change sides, but it's usually a big deal if someone does. This is called a turn, so that's why I called what Purple Puma did a face turn. Some wrestlers have gimmicks, like most of the wrestlers in this episode, but the more fun ones, in my opinion, are the ones with full-on personas and backstories. To go off on a tiny tangent, the difference between gimmicks and personas are kind of like the difference between cross-dressers and gender-fluid people. A cross-dresser may change between having masculine or feminine clothes, but in the end, their sense of self, their view of their self, remains the same. That being said, I don't speak for everyone and can only define things through personal experience. This is all relevant, I swear. Someone who's gender fluid feels different and thus changes their appearance to match what they feel. So then a question might be asked, is Amethyst cross-dressing or gender fluid? I'm getting a little ahead of myself. Up to this point in the show, characters always reference Amethyst with she, her pronouns.
I think we really got through to her.
And yet, Purple Puma is referred to as masculine both by Steven and Mr. Smiley.
Let's introduce his opponent.
So he.
They're the same person. What gives? Does her anatomy change? Does it matter? Amethyst makes it known that she doesn't have a backstory for Purple Puma. So doesn't that mean that it's just a costume? But then Steven gives Purple Puma a backstory.
I want to tell you Purple Puma's backstory.
So then, Danny, wouldn't you say that he is causing her to be gender fluid, as you say? Okay, so first of all, I don't think one person can make another person identify differently, especially when it's Amethyst. So no, Steven does not make Amethyst gender fluid. But the story he tells is Amethyst's story. It's not completely fictional to her, and it did end up convincing Garnet and Pearl to get up off their backs. So, is Amethyst / Purple Puma cross-dressing or gender fluid? The answer is actually simpler than you think. It's a label she chooses for herself. I'm sorry, I lied. A gender fluid person can also identify as cross-dressing. It's really up to the individual. There are no restrictions. I choose to believe that Amethyst doesn't really think that much about it and is just letting loose. And I don't even think that Purple Puma would have a definition for what's going on. This came out over a decade ago, and the idea that a children's show back then would spark this kind of thought process, this kind of developmental thinking, is huge. And it's a big reason why this show connects with me so much, is because it can spark this kind of conversation. While we're at it, I don't really know that much about wrestling, so if something about what I've said sparked something in you, get at it, come back, and tell me what I got wrong. When Pearl mentions using powers on humans, I actually find myself a bit conflicted. On one hand, would we let someone with superpowers play in sports with us on the same level? Probably not. But on the other hand, I don't see anyone getting hurt beyond what they're doing to each other anyway. In the end, I think the distinction comes from the difference between fighting and playing. The humans are setting the standards, setting the rules, and Amethyst is just playing along. That being said, the conflict comes from her superpowers, not her gender. Let trans people do sports.
Oh, snap! Did you see that?
Wait, did anyone else notice that all of the Beach City Underground wrestlers are men? Is Amethyst just Mulaning?
Wait!
Rating. Time for the rating. Let's get back to form. Characters. While I don't agree with everyone's actions, I think everyone acts true to their character. Lars takes things too seriously, and Pearl only gets along with Amethyst when there's an intermediary. So I think I'll give it an 8.5. World. I'm not sure if it's a broken down warehouse or even necessarily where it's located, but we do get introduced to Beach City Underground. 7. Plot. I love the conflict, or rather, conflicts. Pearl and Garnet versus Amethyst and Steven. Amethyst versus Self. Steven versus his fans. It doesn't really connect with the overarching plot of Steven Universe, though, so that does lower the score. I'll say another 7. Art and animation. They have a lot of fun in this episode, with the new characters just introduced briefly through wrestling, and the wrestling moves themselves. I would have liked more diverse wrestlers, but most of the episode is showing, not telling. So I think I'm going to give it an 8.5. Gasm factor. This episode is so exciting as a whole that the climax actually falls a little bit flat. Garnet may have changed her mind a little bit too quick. 6.5.
Millionaire is offering a bride.
Why? We can fill 1,000 potholes with... Oh, snap! Did you see that?
Eagle-eyed viewers will notice that Purple Puma was teased back in Catfingers. Anyway, I'll make you a deal. If you like, comment, and subscribe, I'll post another video. Next one's called Steven's Lion. About what? Stay tuned.